part of Project 571, genetically engineered vampire created to destroy evil.
What do you want?
We need your help to kill a vampire.
Malleus Maleficario. It was written by a witch. The first witch. Titania.
That was a little snippet from The Witch's Hammer, the first film I ever solo directed, and it's just been remastered and re-released on Amazon. So if you like witches and vampires, then please do check it out. Anyway, let's get on with this week's episode. Are you ready for a movie marketing masterclass? Well, I sat down with Jim Fredrick, marketing guru. He's worked on some huge films like the Harry Potter franchise, $1 Million Baby, Shawshank Redemption, The Colour Purple. The list is endless. We chatted all about marketing a movie and how to market your movie. I was even brave enough to get Jim to listen to my pitch for my horror film, The Apocalypse Box. We discussed that. We talked about his tips for marketing your indie feature. We also talked about some of the big hits that he'd had. We talked about how to market a bad film and some of the problems they had marketing The Shawshank Redemption, which is an awesome film. So if you're interested in movie marketing, this is a great episode. But if you're interested in marketing your own movie, then a lot of Jim's insights are really interesting. Enjoy. We'll talk about the book shortly. So just going back to the beginning, so you've gone from cutting trailers, which I think I know how to cut a good trailer. I'll have to send you some of my trailers and you'll have to tell me.
Yeah.
But how do you go from that to then being in charge of marketing? And how do you know how to do it? Were you making it up as you were going along? Were you reading books? Were you how did you figure it all out?
That's a great question. A lot of my peers kind of got thrown into the deep end. They kind of had a job that they're scratching their heads thinking, why on earth do you want me? I've had no experience in my case, publicity. I didn't know much about research, distribution, promotions, consumer product. Marketing is a massive wheel, and I was one spoke in the wheel. It was creative advertising. And the company I worked for, which is called Intralink, not only made trailers, but also designed posters. The head of the company, Anthony Goldschmidt, is this brilliant, multifaceted genius. Overused word in the business, but he truly was the most amazing person I'd ever met in the business to this day. And so consequently, I got to learn both sides of the creative of creating a poster and obviously cutting a trailer, which I felt very confident in after 9 years of doing it and success. So when I ended up, Castle Rock ended up being one of my clients. So I was dealing directly with them. Anthony just said, go ahead, your client, do it. And they liked my work, certainly. They had gotten funded. They had great success in their very first film, which was When Harry Met Sally. And thankfully, that allowed them to kind of develop their business plan, which was 4 movies a year. And so when I went over there, I was pretty honest. I said, listen, I think I know my way around a trailer, and I think I can certainly oversee all the creative advertising work that's a part of your marketing plan. But I really don't know about these other things. And this was very indicative of Alan Horn, Martin Schaefer, Rob Reiner, the 5 partners that started Castle Rock were, if they believed in you, they gave you the keys and they let you drive the car. And basically, I was told by Martin Schaefer, who was my direct report, he's the guy that was really in charge of the theatrical movie business at Castle Rock. We also made TV shows. And he said, I know my way around marketing. We're gonna teach you. We're working with the Columbia department, which is a massive marketing department. You'll learn from them. You'll learn about media buying, which is tremendously important. Certainly research. So all the other various parts of it, they basically said, we'll hold your hand. We'll show you the way while you learn, but we want you to cut our trailers. We think that's the most important part of the business. It's certainly one of the first things out. It really establishes the strategy behind a campaign. So they had a lot of faith in me, and I jumped in with both feet, and it took some time for sure. But I had a great safety net in the partners at Castle Rock. They never once in 8 years, kind of like most production heads, point the finger at marketing for a movie's demise. It was poorly marketed is one of the great excuses used in Hollywood. Not once did that ever happen. Greatest job I ever had, for sure.
Wow. Okay. So a lot of on-the-job training, but people who believed in you.
Yeah, I
That
never
sounds
read
awesome.
any books. I didn't study it in college. I didn't take one advertising or marketing class.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here I am teaching it. It was, which is kind of the modus operandi at our film school is we don't have one. PhD as a professor except in film studies. It's all people who've been in the business, a practical education, so to speak, through doing.
Yeah, no, I can see why now you'd want to get that degree because we want to learn from people like you. But there is nothing better than doing something to learn how it all works and how to kind of get your hands dirty and work out how it all puts together.
That's what we do at Chapman. We really, almost all of our assignments are project based. So you learn by doing.
Yeah. So let's talk tips based on your tons of experience. So based on all that experience, what are the keys to marketing a film well, do you think? What's like the major things you need to think about?
Wow. Well, I always hesitate to call a movie a product. But when you're sitting on the marketing side of things, you kind of have to look at it that. So who's the consumer for this product? In other words, who's your target audience? What are the opportunities you see in this product? What are the obstacles you see in this product? A lot of this is common sense. It doesn't require a marketing degree, in my opinion. Research and gathering data has become hugely important, but it's always been important. It's interesting, my Castle Rock experience differed tremendously from my Warner Brothers experience in that the Castle Rock team, the founders, really went on gut. Just to talk about production just for a second, they didn't test movie concepts, which is done certainly by Netflix and many other production entities these days, and for good reason. They kind of want to know what the potential of a film might be. Certainly, who would be interested in it. Boy, Castle Rock was a throwback to Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg, and they went with their gut. They really did. They wanted to see films that they themselves and the partners were interested in seeing, and that's how they decided to buy and greenlight The Shawshank Redemption, which today probably wouldn't get made by a major studio.
And it's always at the top of the best films list.
Number one,
it's always
on
at the top.
IMDb.
Yeah.
It's been number one for I want to say 5 years now, which is a real head scratcher for me because I hope I'm not jumping the gun here a little bit. It did fail to open. It did fail from a marketing standpoint. We could not convince people, consumers, to go see it on opening weekend, even though we opened it on only 33 screens as opposed to 3,000 screens, which, would have been disastrous. We would have lost a lot of money because it takes a lot of marketing dollars to open a film wide. But Shawshank is a wonderful case study. I use it in all my classes, and it kind of answers your question, I think, very, very specifically. There were things in the Shawshank Redemption from a marketing standpoint that were challenging, to say the least. We really had no stars. Tim Robbins was not a star. Morgan Freeman then was one of his first, real starring roles. Frank Darabont, the writer-director, was unknown. This was his first screenplay. based on a Stephen King story. That was another problem. We really couldn't use Stephen King's name because he was known for something very different. He was known for horror films, and this is scary, but it's not a horror film. The title was difficult. Did we have the option to change it? Not really. We could have, but we couldn't come up with anything better, so we stuck with it. It's a very claustrophobic film. It's an R-rated film that already limits your audience. So I'm just listing a couple of the obstacles that created. And so when you're marketing a film, you really go to the product, you look inside it, and you try to suss out the elements that you think will most appeal to the audience, most predisposed to wanting to go on a Friday night, that opening weekend. And that's marketing's job, is opening weekend. After that, it's on the movie itself, it's word of mouth, the reviews, its release date, the competition. All of those things are kind of out of your hands from a marketing standpoint, especially from a trailer making standpoint. That opening weekend is your job. So that's what cutting a trailer is, I think, very indicative of the other disciplines in marketing. You got to go to all of those things, and you got to find the things that aren't going to turn off your audience, and really lean into the opportunities you have to get it open.
Yeah. One of my questions was going to be, which you sort of answered,
Sorry
was
about that.
Is it easier to market a good film? But you've just proven it's not. It's not. It doesn't matter if the film's good or not.
That's why Shawshank, to me, I get asked by my students all the time, what was your favorite trailer to cut? It was the Shawshank Redemption. You've seen it. Most of your listeners and viewers have, I'm sure, seen it as well. If they haven't, you should see it. It's just loaded with incredible lines of dialogue and scenes that are beautifully shot, and the performances and the characters, and those are the good things in the film. Unfortunately, for the Shawshank Redemption, though, we couldn't really allude to a prison break. Frank Darabont was very, and this happens a lot when you have a filmmaker who doesn't want to give away the store. He wants to save those plot twists and those secrets for the movie-going experience, and he's absolutely right, and marketers should respect that. And Castle Rock, if nothing else, was deferential to our filmmakers when it came to that sort of thing. I think the fact that Rob Reiner was a partner had a lot to do with it. He was a filmmaker, and he understood that aspect. It's back to your question. Yeah, Shawshank was a great film, but I worked on some really awful films too. One film that we managed to open, I hope I'm not going to upset Jerry Bruckheimer, but worked on a film at Warner Brothers called Kangaroo Jack that had a really interesting backstory. It basically started as an R-rated sex comedy, believe it or not. The movie tested horrible. It didn't work. But there was one scene in the movie that involved a guy that gets knocked out by a kangaroo. The kangaroo, in this fever dream, starts talking to him and rapping. And that scene tested great. So we made a teaser trailer with just the talking kangaroo.
Nice.
And people really responded well to the teaser. And Jerry Bruckheimer is Jerry Bruckheimer because he saw that and he said, well, what we have ain't working. We better figure out another movie here. And I have an idea to, if you, the head of the studio, Alan Horn, give me $15 million, I'll go away and I'll animate this kangaroo, and we're going to make this kangaroo more or less the star of the movie. And just like that, the audience changed overnight. It became a family comedy. The movie opened very well, did incredible business after it opened. certainly on DVD, home entertainment had a, so that was a situation where we didn't have the best film, but we found that thing not in the movie. For a while, it was the only thing. It was a talking, rapping kangaroo, and that not only changed the movie, but it led the marketing campaign to becoming a hit because we could identify our audience who was responding to this element. So those are two good examples right there. Shawshank, a great film that we didn't open, and Kangaroo Jack, not such a great film that had no trouble finding an audience.
Wow. Right. Okay, that's good examples. And that is, yeah, that's great. That's thinking about that audience. And I think the other thing you hit on there with the filmmakers not wanting to give stuff away in the trailers is a challenge, especially down the micro budget, low budget end, because you're desperate to get people streaming your film. And if you're dealing with a sales agent, they'll want to chuck the kitchen sink, the twist, everything in it just so they get a sale. So that is a tough one. What about so you obviously your background started in cutting a trailer. Were you using kind of the same format, or were trailers for you a creative thing that you kind of everyone was different, or do they all follow a certain path that you can track?
Wow. I admired the work of a certain competitor when I first started editing trailers. And the first trailer I ever cut, by the way, was The Color Purple. It was the simplest idea. Any 6-year-old with a Premiere Pro could do it. It's basically a music track by Quincy Jones and a bunch of stills, not unlike the work of Ken Burns, where we would zoom in on, images from the film, stills shot by Gordon Parks, world famous filmmaker and photographer. So that was my first trailer, and it could not have been easier. I just basically had to find the beat of Quincy Jones's music, and beautiful piece of music, and out it went. Every movie's different, every trailer's different. I fell in love with a bit of a structure that, as I look back on, the hundreds and hundreds of pieces of trailers and TV commercials I cut, I kind of fell in love with a certain technique. You've heard of it, called the cold open. I thought, let's start with just a no music, a scene that kind of piques the interest before someone loses interest and turns away, and now speeds through it. You kind of hook them on the concept. Is it one scene? Maybe. Is it a couple of scenes cut cleverly together? Maybe. But you kind of establish this beginning, this kind of austere beginning. There's no music to distract you, meaning the audience when I say you. And then the logo comes up, the music starts, and off you go into Act 2, the body of the trailer, which can be as expand on plot, character. Most trailers go too far in this area, in my opinion, more than ever. It's one of the biggest complaints about trailers is they tell you too much, they're too long. All true. And then you get to the third act, and my third act was very similar to most trailer editors, which was a montage of music and imagery to build to an exciting climax, title, and then a button of some kind, usually at the end, a tagline, something. If it's a comedy, certainly it better be your best joke, something funny, something impactful, something emotional. Emotion is tremendously important, as is music. The choice of your music at a trailer is 75% of the game. It sets the tone. It gives you an emotion. Is it fun? Is this funny? Is this scary? Is this action adventure? It just does so much emotionally to persuade and intrigue the viewer. So that was kind of my go-to structure. And it wasn't the same for every film, because every film's different. But I did fall in love with that cold open, which I stole from a New York ad agency called a guy named Gary Canoe, who in my day in the 80s was, to me, the greatest trailer editor there was, and he just always it always worked. And so I thought, hey, I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna use that. So
well, if it works, yeah, use it. I think it's it's a tough one because you're the kind of because you were in that sort of studio system. The you're the expert on the trailer. You're cutting the trailer, and then maybe you might get a filmmaker saying, "Oh no, don't put that bit in," or there's a little bit of tension there. The problem we face making micro and indie low budget films is we're usually cutting our own trailers, which
right.
I think's harder because you can't be ruthless. Sometimes it's hard to figure out how much to give away. Sometimes it's difficult to distill your own story into a trailer. And you get attached to things that you shouldn't. Oh, I love this bit. Well, the audience isn't interested in that at the moment. So yeah, I'm sure there's an advantage in being kind of an outside of that experience. Watching. I mean, did you get to watch all of the films? Do you get rushes? How's that work with
every film was
putting it together?
every film was different. There's some. I've worked on the assassination of Jesse James with Brad Pitt. I saw a 5-hour cut of that. To start with, sometimes you deal with dailies, so you've got to basically piece the movie together before you can even start. Other times, I found that really helped me. One example is I was on the set of A Few Good Men the day they were shooting Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson in this really key finale in the courtroom. And you're watching this scene with these lines that Aaron Sorkin wrote, delivered by two of the great actors of our generation. And I left there, and I just waited by my Avid for those scenes to come to me. And the trailer I cut that ended up being the trailer, it was 60% that scene. It just, I go, I've got it all here. Now I just need to make sure I get Demi Moore here and Kevin Bacon, and without giving away the store, which is something I'm very sensitive to, But that was a good example of working from rushes, which kind of dictated the trailer, to be honest with you. It's funny. I saw a trailer yesterday in one of my classes. A student brought in a trailer for it's a neon film, pretty low budget. I think it was probably picked up someplace. It's called Together, is the name of the movie. And the trailer it's a body horror film.
Oh, Alison Brie, James
Franco.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a young couple, married. It's got this kind of romantic drama vibe. But of course, something else is going on here. I'm not going to go into the details, but there was only one line of dialogue. It was at the very end of the piece. They used a piece of music that was anything but a horror cue, just a classical piano piece of music that just lifted the whole concept up to a very different level, in my opinion. And the question in the class was, everybody loved it. I'm sure it's getting great response online. But the question was, is Neon going to put out another one that tells more, that has more dialogue, that leaves no doubt that this is a body horror film, because that's a very successful genre at the box office. Horror movies, while other genres aren't doing so well, horror movies are doing great. So from a marketing standpoint, you got kind of a dilemma there. I think the Neon folks are scratching their heads going, maybe we should just let this ride. I think they should. I think there's enough intrigue to get people to go. If this were at Warner Brothers or Paramount or Universal, there's no doubt in my mind there would be a second trailer that would try to give the public and the consumer more.
But then you're not thinking of the husband or wife who has said to their partner, oh, here's the trailer, let's go and watch this. And it turns out to be a horrific body horror. And that leads to an argument after the movie, because that would be me and my wife. I'd go, oh, this looks good. Yeah, it's got these. Look at the trailer. Yeah, we'll go and see that.
Yeah, that you're talking about false advertising there. And it's it's a dilemma in our end of the business for sure, because our job at almost all costs is to get people butts in seats opening weekend any way you can. And if it means developing your own plot, your own movie in a way, you're kind of insinuating that this movie is something that it's not. Yeah, that gets tricky. Now, Neon, I think, does not have hundreds of millions of dollars invested in this film. So that takes a little heat off them. That's not their business model anyway. But A24 and Neon in the States are the two distributors that kind of are feeding into the young, adult, college-aged, hip audience. They have very good taste in choosing films. And consequently, whether it's Longlegs, which was probably one of the best marketed films of the year, really, for what they didn't show, including the star of the movie. So I think today's audiences, especially the college age audiences, boy, do I see this at school. They are so discriminating. They are so sharp. And this is a big problem for the movie business right now. How do you get them off the couch? How do you get them off their iPhone, watching films on TV? The streaming industry has nothing but choice out there. I mean, this is a whole other discussion that we can talk about or not, but it's never been harder to convince, particularly that audience, to go. And I think a trailer like this helps solve that problem. I think Neon should be given a lot of credit for what they're doing from a marketing standpoint. They're really breaking out of the norm, which is I see it in the stuff that my students bring into class.
Mm. Yeah, it's again, it's so tough. I keep likening it to the micro budget stuff because again, we're told by, say, a sales agent or even by a streaming platform that the trailer's got to be super obvious what it is. The poster's got to be really clear exactly what it is. Any sort of intrigue, any kind of leaving it up to the viewer to figure it out is just discouraged completely.
Well, you know what I would encourage you and the micro budgeted community who does have to cut their own trailers because they can't afford to hire, whatever. And the problems that you mentioned are real. You're, in essence, you're too close, to be honest. You really are. What you do is a very different craft. 2-hour movie versus 2-minute movie, and that's why studios pay guys like me to go away and cut trailers, because we're not too close to the material. They're not our darlings. And we can be pretty ruthless in trying to find that thing that maybe the filmmaker can't see or won't admit to. Oh, you mean I didn't make a super classy adult only? That's why you kind of need that outside input to be ruthless. However, and this is my advice to a micro budgeted film: show them Longlegs, show them Together, show them these really good examples of not giving away everything. Look at the poster for Terrifier 3, which beat The Joker, a movie that cost $200 million. Terrifier 3 won the box office in the States, and their campaign cost all in $500,000. Now, I know that's not necessarily micro budgeted, but the campaign for Joker 2 was well over $100 million. And they did it by less is more. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's been proven to be successful to a certain audience. Discriminating young adults is how I would oversimplify it. I think when you talk about family movies, that's different. I think you do have to show the parent and show the kid your Pixar trailer. Probably even Pixar kind of backs off. They're really smart about what they show. But when it comes to really super wide saturated releases with $100 million budget for marketing and a movie that costs $200 million, yeah, you're asking a lot, you're risking a lot by assuming the consumer is just all in and they're going.
Yeah.
You should
Yes,
have
good
fun.
tips.
Have fun with your stuff.
Have fun.
Yeah. I don't care what the sales agent says,
Yeah, no, you are right, and it is. I think the trailers that I've had the most success with have been creative and have got and probably do that cold open thing, bit of intrigue, but it does take a while to get there. I always find, and maybe this is kind of backing up what you said, when you find the piece of music that's got the kind of feel of the film, but that's also, because mine's all horror, so obviously that's the kind of world I'm working in. But once I find the right track, then I can piece together little bits of the story and it starts to make a bit more sense. But I don't like, in the past, we've cut trailers that have been way too long, got way too much of the film in. And that's not, I think now I've moved away from that a little bit. So looking at, we were talking about streaming, Amazon, Netflix. How has that changed things in that marketing world?
Well, I honestly think that we're just talking about trailers and poster design, and the creative advertising aspect hasn't really changed that much, to be honest. In 100 years, I would say it hasn't changed that much. How it gets to the consumer, obviously, has changed. Where you could only, 20 years ago, only seeing these materials before a film in a movie theater. Now, obviously, that's probably the least percentage. Everybody's getting it on YouTube and Instagram and other sites, and that's where to find them. So the distribution of the content has really changed a lot. I ought to be perfectly honest. I've never did a streaming campaign. From a creative standpoint, my colleagues who are still in the business say it's the same thing. Our job is to get a subscription bought and people tuning in, or streaming, obviously at their convenience. So their job is still kind of the same. Although I would say, the attention spans of consumers in general has gone from 2 minutes to 8 seconds. You've seen that skip ad button. I use it all the time. And so those first 8 seconds of any kind of promotional material had better be great, or else they're off to what's next. And so that's made the job of marketing films, boy, is that tough these days. So yeah, those first 8 seconds, I don't know if you have time for a cold open,
Yeah, well, the thing is, they do that now. They do the trailer will start in a moment thing where they just show you the 3 most exciting shots out of the trailer, then the trailer starts. But I love trailers, and I kind of don't want that. I just want to get sort of drawn in slowly. But I can understand why they do it, because it's very easy to just swipe past something if it's not.
Well, I want to speak a little bit back to your last question about micro budgets, because I know that's kind of your world, and it certainly relates to the main project I give my students at Dodge, each student is responsible. I pair them up with a student filmmaker. So we have students making their thesis film. The price is probably $15,000 that the school gives them to make their dream movie that they've been dreaming about for 4 years, 15 minutes long. And my students, it's their job to make a trailer for that, and a poster, and a campaign, and a film festival strategy, and copy. They're to come up with a whole marketing campaign for this student film. And I think maybe that's one solution for guys like you, Jim, is to go to your local film school. And they'll
get
work
them to do the campaign.
They'll work for nothing. They will do it for free. They want to build a reel. I would. they're not making any money yet. So, and you can find some incredibly creative film students out there who will listen to you. You give them the direction. Don't give away the store. I want it a minute long. The first 8 seconds better be great. You give them the kind of the white paper, as we called it in advertising, the strategy, and let them bring their creativity to it. And you step back for a second and see what another creative mind can take your product and kind of figure out a way to present it. So I just wanted to throw that out before we get past.
Yeah, no, that is a good suggestion as well, because some of those people in that age bracket are probably a target audience for that movie. So seeing it through their eyes would be quite interesting. I'm not sure. I think there's still that part of me. I've become less like this over time, but I'm very nervous about giving any rushes or any version of the film to anybody. But obviously, if someone's editing it, what we did have on the last film, we had students cutting scenes that we'd shot the day before, just to check we'd got everything in the can. Should have got one of them to cut a trailer. So that's a good tip, and I will definitely put that into action on the next one. So talking about I'm making this all about me. Horror movie. So I released a horror movie in August. It's called The Apocalypse Box. It's a horror movie about a magic box that grants wishes. It's all set on election night. Cross-section of society are gathered together to try and they each get a go at opening this box, make a wish. All goes horribly wrong, as you would imagine in a horror film. How would you market that? What would you do with it, do you think?
It sounds...
Give me the keys to the...
Your little log line there, and it kind of starts there. I mean, that's one thing I have my students do, is write a log line for this one sentence. And that becomes your mantra from a marketing standpoint. It took you a couple of sentences there, and the more you can hone that down, the easier. I hate using the word easy because it's not, but it does. You find that focus, you find that kind of through line, theme, and writing a sentence as succinctly as you can, whether you use AI to write it or whether you write it yourself. And by the way, I don't think that's a horrible idea either, is to type it all out, as a prompt in AI and see what it comes out with one sentence. It probably won't be perfect, but it'll give you an idea. I highly recommend that. I'm learning more about AI as I go along here, but I think that's a great exercise, is to write one sentence, and that becomes your marketing strategy, whether it's a poster, whether it's a trailer, whether it's a stunt idea you have that you want a digital kind of, stunts. Longlegs did so many creative things. Terrifier 3, I had a student who worked on the digital campaign in my class yesterday. This was why I'm bringing up Terrifier 3 out of all the films. And she showed some of the work that that they put out there. And basically it was that old classic horror movie thing where you show night vision photography of the audience going,
yeah,
I can't, but it was so funny and clever. And the comments the audience had to say after the fact, and almost distracted from the movie in a good way, that you wanted to see this movie because of things that were really outside of the product a little bit. So that I'm kind of, going off target a little bit here, but in horror, I think you have such a luxury, in my opinion, to like you said. I mean, you said something really interesting, and everything went wrong as you could imagine. It's a horror movie. So that gives you, to me, license to do something like they did with Terrifier, that you can go outside the movie. You don't need to tell the story, even though I think your story sounds really unusually interesting for a horror movie. But it's still supposed to be one thing above all others. It's supposed to be scary, right? Unless you're trying to
hope so.
Yeah, I mean, a comedy is supposed to be you better laugh in the trailer or else you're not going. So those, I know it sounds like common sense 101 here, but um, I do think horror has really embraced humor more lately, whether it's self-aware or I think consumers really are tired of the old jump shock stuff. I think that trailer is pretty dead. Now, it doesn't mean those are unimportant, but I do think finding some kind of dark humor in your presentation of the film and your concept sounds like it could have that. Election night, there's some really interesting that kind of made me smile just hearing it. So
Good.
that's what I would encourage is try not to just focus on just the shock cuts, because I think it's just old news, and kids want new. That's why found footage was, when Blair Witch came out all those years ago, 25 years ago now. It was new.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thank you for that. I will send you my trailer, and
I'll
get you to
look at it.
I'll get you to assess it.
To the honest
yes,
filmmaker.
do that, and I will. The honest filmmaker, you be honest, and I will put it in the description in the comments what you said, and I'll uncut. So if it's bad, I'll still put it in there.
Did you cut the trailer?
I did. Yeah, I cut the trailer. Yeah.
All right.
I'll just put I'll put your comment, and then I'll put. Oh, what does he know? Yeah. What does he know? He's only got all those years' experience.
Grade a lot of trailers, Jim. Look out.
So what I was going to ask you was, what do you, looking back now, what do you wish you'd known at the very start of your career?
Nothing. I've
never had that before. I've never heard someone say that before.
I think the journey is the journey. It's discovering things. Things happened for a reason. I got fired for a reason. Would I have, as I look back on my career, would I have been happy not to have been fired? Yes. But it led to teaching. It led to other things. I was burned out. My mental health wasn't good at that time. Things that happen, they happen for a reason. I know it's that old cliche. Honestly, it kind of goes back to one of our first questions was, gee, you got hired in this job and you really weren't qualified, Jim. You're right. And if I'd had been more qualified, if I had known more about publicity, if I had knew what media buying really is and how to read a research report, coming into the job, I don't think I would have been hired, to be honest. I think employers kind of want to mold you in a way sometimes in their image, and when you fight that, which I did at Screen Gems, I wasn't willing to play ball with my boss, which was terrible, and it was my fault. But I was at that stage where I felt like, okay, I've had enough success to know that what my gut is probably more right than your gut. And that's something you can't do with the boss. It's their playing field. It's their ball. You got to play ball with them. So, I know that sounds like kind of a trite answer, but I'm glad to be the only one who said, who's gone that route.
No, it's an interesting way of looking at it. What was I going to ask? Oh, yeah. So I was going to just mention, so the book is Opening Weekend, an insider's look at marketing Hollywood's hits and flops. And I will put a link to it in the description.
Thank you.
On both YouTube and podcast so people can check it out. I'm going to ask you one more question. And I definitely think I need to get you back on here so we can drill into some of these huge films you've worked on, because I'm sure people would be really interested to hear about those. But I'll just end this episode with a question I ask a lot of people, which is, have you got a motto? Have you got a mantra? Have you got something you apply to your life and your career?
Yeah, it's the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. I think in Hollywood, wow, I don't know. I don't think Harvey Weinstein led his life that way. I just think And I do think the business is changed in that regard. And this applies to any business, any job, any career path you have. I think you really have to be sensitive to how you treat other people, whether it's your boss, and even more important, the people maybe who work for you, whether you're a director and your crew. You're gonna get a better result from kindness. And man, we're living in a world right now where, especially in our country, where it's being challenged every day. You read about it, and it is really discouraging to see. And all the more reason, I think, for people to kind of rise up and be good to each other. And again, it applies to all walks of life. So that's my motto for sure.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you want to hear about another independent filmmaker who's made a comedy drama, then you could listen to my episode with Tiffany Kim Stevens, where she talks about her film Trigger Happy. It's been released on all streaming platforms, and she gives some great tips about getting the film out there.